Chapter 2766. But she just wanted to eat. Perhaps in that kind of atmosphere, she would feel that life was not so boring. The 24-year-old Qin Chen sometimes felt that life was so long. She could do something for herself to prolong her life, but she had never done that before. What Qin Chen did was costing her life, but she didn't care. If it wasn't for the promise she made to someone, she might not have the courage to live in this world. She changed her clothes and took her coat out of the elevator. She drove a Porsche, and when she was waiting at a red light, she searched for a vegetarian hot pot restaurant. It was quite famous and it was an internet celebrity restaurant. She wanted to ask someone to eat with her, but after thinking about it, she didn't seem to have any friends. Yes, she had always been alone and was used to it. Half an hour later, she went to the vegetarian restaurant. The restaurant's business was especially good. In the summer, the steaming hot pot made people's faces flush red, both men and women. The waitress smiled and said, "Sir, how many people are in your party?" She looked at Qin Chen's dignified, young and good-looking appearance and asked, "Are you here with your girlfriend?" Qin Chen didn't mind and said calmly, "Alone." The waitress's eyes lit up. Such a good-looking customer actually didn't have a girlfriend. Although she knew that it was impossible for her to be with the person in front of her, it was still very pleasant to serve him. The waitress immediately brought Qin Chen to a better seat. "Sir, please take a seat." She pulled out the chair for Qin Chen. Just as Qin Chen was about to sit down, he saw that the person sitting beside him was someone she was familiar with. Lan Yu and Lin Cixi. They sat facing each other. Lan Yu was dressed very outstandingly today, while Lin Cixi looked at Lan Yu with her chin in her hands, her expression a little indescribable. Qin Chen looked at her for a few more seconds, but the waitress misunderstood and whispered, "Is she your girlfriend?" How pitiful. Such a good-looking man was actually cheated on. Qin Mu looked at the waitress and said calmly, "No." The moment she spoke, the people at the table noticed her. Lin Cixi was the first to speak. She seemed to be very surprised. "It's Dr. Qin." As for Lan Yu, his expression was indifferent, and his gaze was deep. No one could tell what he was thinking. Qin Chen looked at Lin Cixi and nodded. Lin Cixi looked at Lan Yu. "Shall we share a table?" Lan Yu looked at Qin Chen, smiled, and said to Lin Cixi in front of him, "Didn't you say you wanted to thank me? Why did you thank Dr. Qin?" Lin Cixi smiled sweetly. "Are you jealous?" Lan Yu smiled faintly, "I don't understand what you mean." Lin Cixi's smile was a little seductive. "I know." She leaned over and said softly, "I'm more suitable for you than Dr. Qin." She was sweet, and at that moment, her breath was like orchids, full of temptation. "If the Grand Hyatt Hotel has my father's support, you should know what kind of heights it will rise to." Lan Yu looked at her and smiled. "Don't you, like Dr. Qin? He rejected me." Lin Cixi was still smiling. "And now, I'm more interested in you." There was a hint of a smile at the corner of Lan Yu's mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You should know that Dr. Qin and I both like men." He also brought up Qin Chen without batting an eyelid. Chapter 2767. Lan Yu smiled. "Little girl, don't have any ideas about me. I'm not the kind of man you think I am." Lin Cixi leaned back. "You've already broken up, but you still can't forget him. Mr. Lan is more infatuated with him than I thought." Lan Yu's voice turned cold. "Didn't you let her see it on purpose?" If he wasn't wrong, Lin Cixi must have hacked Qin Chen's phone. That was why she knew that Qin Chen was going to eat here and asked him to meet here. His company happened to be nearby. This was all a coincidence and Lin Cixi's premeditated plan. This was so that the separated man and woman could be separated more thoroughly. Lin Cixi's target had always been Qin Chen. It had never changed. And he came out just to find out what she wanted to do. That was all. He, Lan Yu, had no interest in such a perverted and ignorant girl. But looking at Qin Chen's reaction, he found it quite interesting. Although it was faint, it looked very displeased. To be able to make Dr. Qin unhappy was the best thing for Lan Yu. They were whispering back and forth. It wasn't very friendly, but their voices were low. In the eyes of others, it was a very intimate conversation between a man and a woman. Qin Chen's vegetarian pot arrived. She ate quietly and chose not to listen to their conversation. Of course, she couldn't hear it clearly. She only knew that Lin Cece seemed to be very happy under Lan Yu's teasing. She giggled. She ate her food expressionlessly and didn't leave because of who it was. She ate for about half an hour and then stood up to pay the bill. All her actions were done in one go. It was beautiful and exquisite. Almost all the women in the restaurant were looking at Qin Chen. They couldn't take their eyes off her. Lan Yu was also very handsome. However, this kind of handsome was definitely not as stunning as Qin Chen. Her natural exquisiteness made women couldn't help but look at her. The Prince Charming in every girl's imagination was probably someone like Qin Chen. When Qin Chen left, he didn't even look at Lan Yu, let alone Lin Cece. When they paid the bill, the waiter was still the same. He whispered, "It's good to be optimistic. Little girls these days are messing around." Qin Chen signed expressionlessly, then said to the waiter in a serious tone, "That man is my ex-boyfriend." After saying that, he slowly left. The remaining waitress was left in a state of confusion. Heavens, she was mistaken. Ex-boyfriend? Is this gentleman? Gee? Such a good-looking man actually likes men. The waiter wiped his tears. This world was too unfair. Then, when she went to clean up Qin Chen's table, she looked at the adulterous couple with even more hostility. Especially when he looked at Lan Yu, his gaze was filled with disdain. "You bent such a handsome man. Are you going to take responsibility till the end?" It was too infuriating. When Lan Yu met that gaze, his heart skipped a beat. Then he looked at Lin Cece. "Thank you. This meal is on me." Lin Cece wanted to say something, but Lan Yu already said, "Also, don't have any ideas about Qin Chen. Even if she breaks up with me, it's not your turn." Lin Cece smiled from ear to ear. "Why are you so sure, Mr. Lan?" "Because Qin Chen is a woman." Lan Yu stood up and smiled faintly. "I've checked the goods. It can't be wrong." Lin Cece didn't say anything. There was not much expression on her face. Chapter 2768. After he left, Lin Cece looked at the direction in which he left and smiled. "I knew it." The first time she saw Qin Chen, she knew that she was a woman. That was exactly what she liked. Such a perfect person was what she imagined him to be. She believed that if she and Qin Chen were together, she could give Qin Chen everything he wanted. Qin Chen's identity was too dangerous. Only she could keep Qin Chen safe. This was something that Qin Chen would know. Lin Cece soon left. No one knew that she was the world's top hacker, K. She knew much more about Qin Chen than Lan Yu. Including the French-Chinese-American noble named Rong Lei. Qin Chen drove around and didn't drive back to her apartment until 2:00 in the afternoon. After parking the car, she walked to the elevator and saw a slender figure standing there. Qin Chen paused for a moment and then walked slowly over there. When she passed by Blue Universe, she pressed the button for the elevator and asked calmly, "Is it possible to move something that was left here?" He nodded, "Yes." Qin Chen didn't say much to him and allowed him to enter the elevator. They stood in the elevator and looked at each other in silence. She didn't want to speak, but Lan Yu said, "Don't you wonder why Lin Cece and I are together? She said today that she wants to pursue you." Qin Chen said expressionlessly. Lan Yu looked at her and said in a low and hoarse voice, "You don't care?" Qin Chen looked into his eyes. Lan Yu said softly, "A man who has slept with himself will generally feel uncomfortable when he is with someone else. Qin Chen smiled. When it comes to unavoidable things, it doesn't matter even if you're uncomfortable, because it's irreversible, just like human life. She said it very calmly, but it angered him. He stared into her eyes and said word by word, "If this man was Rong Lei, would you still not care?" He was so angry that he had forgotten his original intention of coming here. Actually, he wasn't such a childish man, but he still couldn't let it go, and more than that, he couldn't accept it. They had only been living together for a few days, and it was over before they could even start. However, as soon as he finished speaking, he regretted it. These words were undoubtedly hurtful to Qin Chen. Sure enough, her originally calm face became somewhat cold. She just looked at him. When the elevator arrived, she didn't go out. Instead, she pressed the button for the second floor. Mr. Lan probably doesn't care about worldly possessions. If I find something that doesn't belong to me, I'll throw it away, she said coldly, and looked away from him. Lan Yu's jaw tightened, and his fingers clenched into fists. After a long time, he said in a low and hoarse voice, "You don't care at all. To you, I'm dispensable. Once you find out that I touch your forbidden area, will I be kicked out?" "Yes." Qin Chen looked at him and said firmly, "You are nothing to me." Lan Yu's expression changed instantly. After a long time, he laughed softly. "I underestimated Dr. Qin's heart of stone, and your infatuation." When he said the last 4 words, Qin Chen looked at him. Her voice was full of mockery. "Lan Yu, how much do you know? Not everyone is as fickle as you are." Her words had thoroughly infuriated him. The next second, he pressed her against the wall of the elevator. Chapter 2769. Lan Yu gently pinched her chin with his slender fingers and moved his face closer. "Since you're keeping your chastity for a dead person, why do you still sleep with me? I'm the one who makes you feel comfortable, right?" Qin Chen narrowed his eyes, and a slap was already thrown over. The sound was crisp and clear. This was also the first time that Qin Chen behaved like a woman. She stared at Lan Yu. Lan Yu's face was slapped to the side. He slowly turned around and looked at her. Suddenly, he smiled lightly. "Qin Chen, I'm just an ordinary man, and you're destined to be extraordinary, so I'm probably really forcing it." He smiled helplessly and bitterly. "I'm sorry. I was impulsive. I shouldn't have offended the person in your heart, let alone offended you." He was wrong, very wrong. How could he have thought that Qin Chen could be with him forever? Qin Chen was also wrong. She was wrong to be so dazzling and damn attractive to him. He had no doubt that as long as Qin Chen wanted to seduce someone, she only needed to show a little bit, and no matter whether the person was a man or a woman, they would be fooled. She was a poison between men and women, or to put it bluntly, an aphrodisiac. Lan Yu stared at him for a long time and chuckled. "Qin Chen, we always quarrel like this. Maybe we're really not suited for each other. It's also good to separate." With that, he slowly exited the elevator. When Lan Song turned around, he heard Qin Chen's voice from behind, "It's not like that." His body froze. Then, he slowly turned his head to look at her. Qin Chen leaned against the elevator. Her eyes were a little confused, and her expression was more fragile than he had ever seen. At this moment, Qin Chen was no longer that popular young man, but more like a little girl. The corners of her mouth trembled slightly. After a long time, she said in a low voice, "I won't be with my patient, for a long time." She looked at Lan Yu and said, "That feeling of powerlessness, Lan Yu, you don't understand." Her voice was so soft that it sounded like she was murmuring. In just a moment, he disappeared. He disappeared from the top floor. She laughed, but her face was full of tears. "They say he is dead. They say Rong Lei is dead. But I don't believe that such a person would die." Her expression was extremely fragile. "Lan Yu, don't come looking for me anymore. I can't bear the pain of losing another person." She hugged her head with her hands. It's been so many years. I'm fine alone. I have no worries, no heartache. She slowly squatted down, alone, squatting in the corner of the elevator. She cried like a child. Lan Yu stood there and looked at her quietly. He told himself that she was right, that he should leave now, that they were not of the same world. However, his feet did not move. He had never seen Qin Chen like this before. Even in his imagination, he couldn't imagine it. But his heart ached. It really hurt. He took a step forward and picked her up. Qin Chen, I'll take you home. At this moment, he didn't have that intention. He wasn't a young boy anymore. Although his heart ached, although he was reluctant, and he still liked her, he wouldn't easily decide to be with her again. Moreover, this kind of thing wasn't one-sided. Who knew if Qin Chen would regret it when she woke up tomorrow? Lan Yu held her and reached out to press the elevator button, but the person in his arms whispered, "Don't go home." Chapter 2770. This was killing Lan Yu. He hugged her and said in a loving voice, "Qin Chen, where do you want to go? I'll take you there." She leaned against him and gently hugged his waist with her fingers. She put her face on his shoulder and whispered, "To your place." Lan Yu's body was a little tense and he narrowed his eyes. "Do you know what this means?" Qin Chen pursed her lips. "Lan Yu, you don't want to?" She tightened her slender hands on his back. "Or you don't want me anymore?" How could he not want her? Every pore of his was clamoring for her. He quickly returned to his car and kissed her for a long time before starting the car. When he let go of her, his eyes lingered on her red and swollen lips. 3 of the buttons on her shirt were undone. At this time, she no longer looked like a man, but a woman who was so sexy that it was hard to breathe. Lan Yu drove the car back to his villa at the fastest speed he had ever driven in his life. The villa was not big. It only had 2 floors and a total area of more than 400 square meters. There was only one big suite on the 2nd floor, the master bedroom, the living room, and the study. He hugged her and kissed her in the living room before he could go back to the master bedroom. Under the dim light, the clothes fell to the ground one by one. Under the dim light, Qin Chen's curves were like a goddess. Lan Yu worshipped and praised her. In the extreme joy, they had each other, over and over again, as if they didn't know fatigue. It was not until the sky was about to turn bright that he hugged her and fell asleep on the spacious sofa. Around them, the clothes were still scattered messily, but no one cared about them. Lan Yu lived alone. He was a family man and paid attention to his privacy. Usually, he would only have part-time workers on weekends, therefore, he didn't think that their slutty behavior would be seen by others. However, they had been seen by others. It was Lan Yu's mother who came. She had been worried about Lan Yu recently, so she came to see him. It was long past the time to get up, but her son's house was quiet. She wondered if he had gone to work. But the more he went to the 2nd floor, the more he felt that something was wrong. It felt as though a man and a woman had done it before. Lan Yu's mother was also an experienced person, so she was naturally very sensitive. The sliding door to the living room was open. Standing in the doorway, she froze. At this time, the morning light shone through the white French curtains. It was gentle and warm, and it also allowed the scene inside to be seen clearly. Lan Yu was lying flat on his back. He was only wearing a pair of boxer shorts. It was black and looked very sexy. In his arms, there was a girl. She was very tall. He was only wearing a Lan Yu shirt that reached above his knees, and his back was facing him. Lan Yu's mother stared at the pair of legs. They were indeed very beautiful. She had seen many models, but none of them had such a long and slender figure. Furthermore, they were very fair and very pleasing to the eye. The girl's face was buried in Lan Yu's neck, and one of her hands was wrapped around Lan Yu. This sleeping position was very beautiful. Lan Yu's mother was comforted. Her son had finally found a decent girl. But she frowned again. Was it a little too fast to get on the bed now? At this moment, Lan Yu woke up. When he opened his eyes, he saw his mother staring at him blankly. He said in a hoarse voice, "Mom, why are you here?" Chapter 2771. Blue Mother stammered, "Come and have a look since you have someone here, I'll go first." "You're busy." Young people, when they wake up, they have to make a mess again. Blue Mother's face is still red. Lan Yu frowned and wanted to say something. Qin Chen woke up. She heard the sound and looked in the direction of the sound. Immediately, Blue Mother called with her. Qin Chen sat up and grabbed his short hair. And Mother Lan was also shocked. "God, it's the venomous Dr. Qin." Blue Mother looked carefully, and it was really her. Looking at the clothes around, they were all men's shirts and trousers. Blue Mother's heart sank again. It can't be wrong. After a while of surprise, Qin Chen grabbed his hair and looked at Lan Yu. "Well, I'll wash it first, you talk." She was about to get up, and Lan Yu grabbed her hand. "Go to the second cabinet in my dressing room to get clothes. There are clothes I wore in college. The size should be about the same as yours now." Qin Chen nodded and walked into the master bedroom. There were only Blue Mother and son in the living room. Lan Yu didn't avoid his mother, so he got up in a pair of shorts, packed up his and Qin Chen's clothes, and threw them into the laundry basket. His movements were very smooth, as if he was packing his own and his wife's clothes. Blue Mother looked at it, and it took her a long time to find her voice. "You and her, how come again? Didn't they say they broke up? How can you break up and get out immediately?" And it also came to Lan Yu. In her heart, Qin Chen is a very proud person and will not easily step into other people's place. Lan Yu put on a pair of trousers, casually found a shirt to put on, sat on the sofa, took out a cigarette, lit it and took a long smoke. "Mom, there was an accident yesterday." He paused for a moment. "I and her, it depends on what she thinks." He is not so naive. She wanted him last night, but it doesn't mean she still wants him today. To put it bluntly, you shouldn't take biological matters too seriously in the hearts of adults. If you took it seriously, you would lose. He might not have seen countless people, but he had at least had a few women, and he had not seen through all of them. However, it was Qin Chen's first time, but he saw through it thoroughly and put it into practice more thoroughly. From the beginning, he had lost. Blue Mother is a little worried. This kind of worry is called afraid that her son will be played. She hesitated for a moment. "Should I talk to her again?" "Forget it." Lan Yu smiled. "You can't communicate with her." Blue Mother is a little lost. Indeed, the Lan family was not bad, but the Qin family was better. Moreover, Qin Chen was a medical genius, while she was just a housewife. There was really no common language between them. From the bottom of her heart, Lan Yu's mother approved of Qin Chen's appearance when she saw his back and legs. It's a girl at first sight, and it should be a very good girl. If it weren't for the strange habit of wearing men's clothes, Lan Yu's past dark history wouldn't be worthy of other girls. Blue Mother's heart hesitated, and finally sighed. "I'll go back first, Lan Yu, you can do it." Chapter 2772. After she finished speaking, Lan Yu was also moved. His mother's words were not excessive. He thought for a moment and smiled. "Okay, Mom, I promise you." Blue Mother smiled. "Then I'm leaving." Lan Yu walked her downstairs and watched the driver drive away. Back upstairs, Qin Chen had already come out of the bathroom and was drying his hair with a towel. She was wearing a set of white sportswear from his college days. She was very refreshing and pleasing to the eye. She was not so masculine and very neutral. Lan Yu hugged her and kissed her on the neck. He murmured, "Are you unhappy?" Qin Chen put down the towel and smiled. "This is your home. Your mother is here. What's there to be unhappy about?" He didn't let go of her and continued to smell the good smell on her body. It was the smell of the shower gel he used to use. At this moment, she had it on her body, as if she was stained with all of him. He was a little moved and wanted to do it again, but he couldn't figure out what she was thinking at the moment, so he kept his composure and probed step by step. If you were my wife, I think you have the right to be unhappy when my mother comes over. He chuckled, then picked up the towel beside him and continued to dry her hair. Qin Chen looked at him. Do you want to get married? Is it strange? He said casually, I have to get married. Qin Chen was obviously stunned for a moment, then he asked softly, is this your test? Lan Yu slowly slowed down as he dried his hair. Then, he put down the towel and admitted, yes, it's a test. Chen, I want to date you on the premise of marriage, not just cohabitation. He emphasized, we don't have to live together, but we can eat together when we're free. I'll cook for you. We can also go to the movies like others and travel together. When he said this, his eyes were very gentle, and his expression was a little moved. Qin Chen lowered his eyes and smiled. I thought you still hated me before last night. Without love, where does hatred come from? He bit her ear and felt her softening, so he said more seductively, and I'll be free on weekends. We can make love all night, okay? No. Qin Chen pushed him away. Lan Yu's face was a little dark. He thought he had been rejected. Qin Chen walked to the French window, opened the curtains, and turned his head. That's not healthy. You have to control it. Lan Yu looked at her with a blank expression. What, you don't understand? Qin Chen smiled. Do you want me to explain it to you word by word? Then, he muttered to himself, I'm starting to doubt your intelligence. Before she could finish, he had already walked over and hugged her. Hugging her tightly, he buried his face in her shoulder and said hatefully, do you know how hateful you are? I know. Qin Chen was still smiling. So you have to give in to me. Do you know how hateful you are? He bit her fiercely to vent his hatred. Little thing, he said in a deep and husky voice, although it's not healthy, I still want to do it. After that, he cupped her face and kissed her. His kisses landed on her little face, as if the sun was kissing her. Qin Chen closed her eyes, and her slender hands hugged his waist. Just once. Chapter 2773. When she woke up again, it was already 2:00 in the afternoon. Qin Chen was sleeping in the master bedroom. She opened her eyes and looked at the long white curtains in front of the French windows and the Nordic furniture. Lan Yu's bedroom was very simple, but it was very refreshing. It was the way she liked it. Qin Chen sat up with the bedsheet wrapped around her. She looked up and suddenly found an oil painting hanging on the bedside table. It was her on the painting. That night, she was wearing Lan Yu's black shirt and sitting on the piano. So, he had hung it here. Qin Chen looked at it carefully and reached out to touch it gently, as if she was touching a dream. The soft sunlight shone on her face, making her expression look even gentler. Lan Yu stood at the door of the bedroom and looked at her gently. Although I'm very angry, I still hung it on the bedside table. It's very beautiful. He smiled and walked over. He bent down and knelt in front of her, leaning over and kissing her. Qin Chen reached out and hugged his neck, so she didn't care that the bedsheet fell. She hugged him and kissed him lightly. She smiled gently. What if you bring someone back one day and see it? Lan Yu's forehead was against hers and he was still smiling. If that's the case, I'll hide it in advance, because I'm afraid she will feel inferior when she sees it. Qin Chen chuckled and bit his lips. Really? Isn't it better to be a new lover? No one will be as good as you. Lan Yu's big palm was a little unruly again. You vixen. Isn't it more like a man? She didn't stop him and obediently enjoyed his service. In the bedroom, he was always pleasing her. She liked his skills. She suspected that he had painted human bodies before, so he was so familiar with women's bodies. The result of this indulgence was that they warmed up on the bed again. In the end, he was finally satisfied. After washing her, he carried her to the dining room. During this time, she only had his black shirt on. He liked it when she wore it like this. Try my cooking. He had made a few exquisite Thai dishes for her today, and they looked very good. Qin Chen was originally a very exquisite person. After eating, he felt very satisfied. Lan Yu sat across from her and looked at her satisfied expression. He then asked seriously, Qin Chen, which part of me do you think is the most important? He raised his hand. Is my hand more important, or, my lips more important, or, in the back? He winked at her. She should understand. As a doctor, Qin Chen naturally understood. Otherwise, as a woman, she would also understand. Lan Yu served her a bowl of winter skill soup and whispered, eat slowly, it's a little spicy. Qin Chen took a sip before answering him. I can't do without any of them. Her expression was a little mischievous as she spoke. Lan Yu was a little dazed. After a moment, he came back to his senses and said with a smile, do you want to try them one by one? Qin Chen looked at him with a somewhat meaningful gaze. After a moment, she whispered, haven't you tried them all? There are more powerful ones. Do you want to try? Lan Yu smiled. This time, the way Qin Chen looked at him was a little different. After a long time, she wiped her fingers clean and said with a smile, as a vegetable, aren't you, too excited? An exquisite scalpel appeared in her hand as if by magic. She waved the blade at him. Chapter 2774. Lan Yu narrowed his eyes. He had never known that Qin Chen had such an ability. Where did she hide the scalpel? However, he suddenly recalled that he had stripped her naked, but she had a black crystal wristwatch on her hand. The small scalpel was hidden in the wristwatch. He got up and walked over. He knocked the scalpel out of her hand and hugged her from behind. He kissed her little neck and said in a low voice, baby, be careful. It's easy for me to lose something important. As he hugged and kissed her like that, he slowly became aroused. Eventually, he carried her back to the master bedroom. Qin Chen placed her slender fingers on his lips and smiled. Lan Yu, you're too indulgent. His hands did not stop as he chuckled. I want to indulge myself today so that you can compare yourself with me. He had never been like this before. He felt that it was worth it to die for her. From dawn to dusk, they lingered for the entire afternoon. When she woke up, it was already 9 o'clock. When she woke up, she was in his arms. It was a little late at night and her voice was a little hoarse. Lan Yu, are we really in love? Lan Yu reached out and hugged her slender body. They hugged and waited for the light to come together in the dark night. In her countless dark nights, there had never been someone like Lan Yu who accompanied her so thoroughly. She whispered, Lan Yu, will we be together forever? Yes. He smiled. As long as you don't leave me, we will always be together. Qin Chen lay in his arms and looked up at his blurry face. She smiled gently. All right, let's try it once. She then said softly, maybe I'm not used to wearing a dress, but I'll try to wear it for you at home. But you're not allowed to laugh. You can wear men's clothes for the rest of your life. Lan Yu reached out and played with her short hair. Just wear my shirt at home. She clenched her fists and punched his shoulder. How could she not know his dark thoughts? They hugged each other until dawn. Only when the sunlight was gentle did she fall asleep. After falling asleep, she dreamed of the sound of K-pop unraveling. This time, there was no blood in the dream, no parting. The only thing that accompanied her was Lan Yu's heavy aura. In the afternoon, he dragged her up and kissed her heavy eyelids. Qin Chen, let's fall in love. Qin Chen was lying on the bed. Lan Yu, I thought that in your understanding, love is to make love non-stop. If you can bear it, of course I'm willing. He raised his hand to unbutton his shirt, but Qin Chen stopped him. She bit her lip and looked at him. Let's go out. She sat up and sat on one of his legs, looking a little distressed. Lan Yu, where are we going? Are we going to an art exhibition or a medical exhibition? He looked at her, his eyes bright and clear. After a long time, he reached out and pinched her nose. Chen, you really haven't been in a relationship before. He lifted the quilt and got up, not avoiding to confess his feelings in front of her. Chen bit her lip. Pervert. Only for you. He bent down, pinched her face, and then carried her into the bathroom. Let's shower together. When they came out, it was an hour later. As soon as Chen got into the car, she complained that she was hungry. Chapter 2775. Lan Yu tilted his head and looked at her with a smile in his eyes. Chen must not know how cute her expression was at that moment. She also did not know that she was acting coquettishly. Unknowingly, she had become a woman in love. However, she did not know it herself. Lan Yu's gaze became very gentle. He reached out and stroked her hair. You should have more. Your skin is abnormally white. Therefore, he had always thought that she was too beautiful. She was as pretty as a girl because her skin was too white. Chen glanced at him and snorted. He did not say anything else. Lan Yu picked a French restaurant. When he walked in with Chen, it was quite a commotion. Two equally outstanding men appeared in an extremely intimate manner. Obviously, little show was Chen. Lan Yu was very at ease. So was Chen. They never had any psychological pressure. They sat down together and ordered their meal. The waiters were secretly watching them. They were so much more attractive than the pair that was very popular on the internet. Moreover, they were very natural and not pretentious. Lan Yu ordered and pushed his order to Chen. Do you want to add anything? Actually, he had been paying attention to these things. He knew what Chen liked to eat. She could eat chicken chop rice when she was busy. However, once she was not busy, she would probably not even look at that kind of food. He knew how difficult it was to take care of her. The waiter first served the apéritif and dessert. Chen raised his eyebrows. Mine? What else? Is it mine? Lan Yu smiled. Don't all girls like this? Chen looked at him and said softly, just eat at home. Look at me now. It's a little weird. It's weird when we're together. Lan Yu did not care. He forked a small piece of dessert and sent it to her lips. Be good. Eat a little. Chen was usually thick-skinned, but he still blushed at this moment. She took the spoon from his hand and whispered, I'll do it myself. However, he still felt a little awkward. A grown man eating dessert in a French restaurant. In the past, she would still put on an act outside. A girl's hobby was to not let others see her when she was alone. But now, she didn't care if others saw Lan Yu. She said she wanted to be serious with him, so she didn't have to pretend. She would try her best to be what he liked. The compromise, she thought, was that it was important for them to get along. Chen only ate less than half of it before he took a sip of apéritif to suppress his hunger. When the main course arrived, she ate in silence. Etiquette prevented her from talking too much to Lan Yu. He wasn't affectionate either. Just like her, he quietly enjoyed the world of the two of them. Suddenly, the lights in the dining room slowly went out. Then, candles floated on the surrounding walls. The silver candlesticks lit the candlelight. It was very romantic. A golden-haired foreign man was playing the violin beside them. He was playing the song, Butterfly Lovers. Chen had grown up abroad and was very westernized. However, she had a little understanding of China's classical music. She looked at Lan Yu in surprise, her gaze filled with affection. This was very rare for Chen. She could feel his sincerity towards her, and it was not that she was not touched. When the man finished playing, she held Lan Yu's hand and said in a low voice, the mood is right, but it's too sad. Is this the result you wanted? Chapter 2776. When the man was done, she held Lan Yu's hand and said in a low voice, "The mood is right, but it's too sad. Is this what you want? Whether we live or die, we'll be together. Isn't this a good ending?" Lan Yu smiled. He then took a rose from the man's hand and gave it to Qin Chen. Qin Chen looked at the fresh rose and said after a while, "Lan Yu, you're an artist and have romantic thoughts, but I'm a doctor. In my world, love may be important, but life and death are more important." He smiled. "So, we'll live well together until we're very old. We'll live until you can't even walk away if you want to." He hugged her from behind and kissed her cheek. He didn't care if others saw him or pointed at him. He said that he didn't care what she looked like outside. She looked good enough in men's clothes. So what if others thought he liked men? He only needed to know the beauty of his woman. Qin Chen turned his face and looked at him with a deep gaze. Lan Yu knew that she had always been low-key. He asked in a low voice, "Are you angry?" "No." Qin Chen smiled. "I'm very happy." She even kissed him on the lips, not caring what others thought. Lan Yu was stunned. He didn't think that Qin Chen would be willing and like him doing this. He just wanted to do what all boyfriends did. Or rather, he wanted to test her, yes, test her. She said that they wanted to be together. In his heart, he might not believe her. So he brought her out to test her. He felt a little guilty seeing her like this. He felt that he had gone overboard. Qin Chen was like a blank piece of paper when it came to relationships. If he liked her, he liked her. If he didn't like her, he didn't like her. She would say whatever she felt, just like how she was only willing to be friends with him in the past. She made it clear. Now that she said that she wanted to be serious, he didn't believe her. For the first time, Lan Yu was in a sorry state. He felt that he was too evil. He hugged her without saying a word. He had never expected her to be so naive. She had no idea how bad men could be. "Qin Chen, I'm sorry." His voice was low and hoarse. Qin Chen looked at him. "Lan Yu, what's wrong?" He hugged her tighter and whispered, "I'm sorry I'm late." This sentence made her smile. She put her hand on the back of his and said very softly, "It's not too late to come now." He didn't say anything else and just felt her warmth. The people around them were all watching them. No one would think that they were wrong, because it was obvious that they loved each other deeply. At least, that was what the man who was hugging her said. He was so excited that it was as if he had won 5 million. "Lan Yu, how much longer do you want to hug me?" Qin Chen whispered, "I'm a little hungry. I want to eat something." The look in Lan Yu's eyes was indescribable. At such a warm moment, she actually wanted to eat something. "Did I say something wrong?" Qin Chen asked carefully. Then, a scalpel appeared in his hand. "Or is your steak too tough? Should I cut it into small pieces for you?" "You, idiot." Lan Yu suppressed himself. Chapter 2777. "I know." Lan Yu's voice was very low. "But you're still an idiot." Qin Chen snorted. "Is this the best way for you to express your feelings?" Qin Chen pursed her lips and reached out to poke his shoulder. "You're very stupid. The whole restaurant is looking at us." "Then let them see," Lan Yu said indifferently. Then, he held her lips and kissed her deeply. His kiss was very deep, and Qin Chen's cheeks were deeply sunk in. She patted his shoulder, but she couldn't stop him. She only patted his shoulder when she was panting. "Lan Yu, do you want to be on the social news? Then do it." He retreated a little and gazed into her eyes. "At most, they will write about 2 men hugging and kissing, right? Let them write it. I want to kiss you now." Lan Yu's voice became very lingering. His kiss also began to be very gentle. He kissed her lips lightly and said hoarsely, "If we weren't in the restaurant, I would choose to carry you to the bedroom. She didn't know that she was the most powerful medicine. Lan Yu had never been so indulgent in the past. Qin Chen bit him lightly. Although she stopped him, her voice was filled with indulgence. Okay. Let's go back, okay? Lan Yu let go of her, probably because he got her promise. His face was very restrained and very abstinent. But his behavior just now had a sense of freedom that only an artist would have. Qin Chen said that he was a doctor. He was so strict that he didn't fit in with a person like Lan Yu. But they were strangely together. And very harmonious. The lights in the restaurant were turned on again, and the photos of them kissing in the candlelight quickly made the headlines of all the news. Lan Yu and Qin Chen's identities were uncovered. One was the CEO of a top hotel chain, and the other was a world-class genius doctor. Their identities were similar, but the key was that they were both men. The kissing scene in the photo was beautiful, but it couldn't change the fact that they were two men. That night, thunder and lightning flashed. Qin Chen's apartment was closer, so they ran to her apartment. When he arrived at the door, he realized that everyone was drenched. Qin Chen leaned against the door and smiled softly. He hooked Lan Yu's collar with one hand and gently pulled him toward himself. Her voice whispered against his lips, "After tonight, we will be celebrities tomorrow." "There's no need for tomorrow. It'll probably be spread all over the world tonight." Lan Yu chuckled and kissed the corner of her mouth. "Are you ready, Qin Chen? If you're not ready to announce your gender. Do you mind?" She enjoyed his kiss, raised her head, and looked into his clear eyes. Lan Yu chuckled. "It depends on you. If you want to be a man, then I don't mind." Qin Chen reached out and hugged him. Her red lips moved close to his ear. "Lan Yu, hug me." She opened her door with one hand and hugged him with the other, letting him carry her into the dark room. In the past, she was very afraid of the dark, but now, she didn't seem to be afraid. Because of Lan Yu, his body was warm. He placed her on the sofa, in the dim light. He removed all of her. In the dark night, she was like the goddess Venus, blooming for him. Lan Yu called her name, over and over again. Chapter 2778. Late at night. Just as Lan Yu and Qin Chen were enjoying each other's company, in the presidential suite on the top floor of the GM Hotel in B City. A slender figure stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, quietly gazing at the city. "Chen, this is your hometown. I'm coming." He gazed at the window quietly, his fingers slowly tightening. A cold female voice came from behind him. "Young Master Rong, I've got the news. She's living alone in an apartment now. Anna, give me the address. I'll go look for her now." The man's voice was slightly hoarse. Immediately, he turned his head. His face was handsome and he had a very noble aura about him. He was wearing a gray shirt and black trousers. It was a simple outfit, but he looked very good in it. Beside his hand was an antique porcelain cup with the royal seal of the last century. Just this cup alone was worth millions of pounds. Anna looked at her master with a troubled expression. The man raised an eyebrow. "What's the problem?" Anna pursed her lips. "She's with another man." The antique porcelain cup in Rong Lei's hand that was worth millions of pounds shattered into pieces. His palm was cut into a bloody mess. Drops of blood dripped onto the pure white wool carpet, but he didn't feel it at all. Anna pursed her lips and handed him a photo. Lan Yu, Chinese American. The CEO of the world's largest hotel chain. He used to be an artist and is very famous in the industry. That photo was held in Rong Lei's blood-stained palm. Rong Lei looked at the photo quietly. He watched as his Qin hugged and kissed another man. "Qin, I haven't seen such a little girl's expression in your eyes for a long time. I thought you'd sealed your heart for me, but you still betrayed my feelings." Rong Lei closed his eyes slightly. With a flick of his fingers, the photo turned into ashes. Anna, who was standing at the side, was shocked. "Master, do you need me to deal with that man?" Rong Lei quietly walked to the side of the luxurious desk. He took a tissue and gently wiped the blood off his hands. His voice was very slow. "No need. To get rid of a person, you have to completely eradicate him from his heart. Just taking his life is not enough." He knew his Qin the best. The fact that she could let that man kiss her meant that she was moved. She had given herself to someone else so easily. Rong Lei closed his eyes. "Give me the address." Anna hesitated for a moment and gave him the address. Night. Wind and rain intertwined. On the top floor of the building opposite Qin Chen's apartment stood a black figure. He stood there quietly, his gaze falling on the penthouse of the opposite building. The huge floor-to-ceiling windows formed a huge wall. Inside, it was dim and dark. Lightning flashed and thunder roared. The world turned bright in an instant. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he saw a man and a woman entangled in the apartment opposite. The contrast between the black and the white was like a dream. His Qin, under another man's body, was like a white lotus blooming. The body that he had been reluctant to possess was now entangled with another man. Rong Lei looked at them quietly. It was as if he could hear their panting. He could even feel the pleasure of her body. He had been with her for too long. He understood her and could even feel her senses sometimes. At this moment, she was in the midst of great joy. She was about to fall in love with the man named Lan Yu. Chapter 2779. Rong Lei narrowed his eyes and looked at her quietly, letting the pain cut through his heart. "Qin, I'm back. Why didn't you wait for me for one more year?" A year ago, she was still alone. A year later, there was someone else by her side. She treated that man so passionately, as if she had forgotten their past, and that she had once said, "Rong Lei, if you don't exist in this world, then I will become you, become another Rong Lei." For so many years, he had watched from afar as she turned into herself. He had watched as she sealed her heart in ice. He had watched as she kept people at a distance of 1,000 miles. She became another person, Rong Lei. He thought that she would only remember him for the rest of her life. He was eager to come back and see her, but he endured it because he believed that she didn't want anyone else in this world except for him. However, she fell in love with such a mediocre man. In the dark, Rong Lei left quietly, just like how he came quietly. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled throughout the night, only gradually stopping at daybreak. Early in the morning, the fresh air drifted into the apartment, and it felt comfortable. Qin Chen moved. When she opened her eyes, she saw Lan Yu's smiling face. She smiled gently and hugged him. Her voice was very low. "I'm so hungry. It's been too hard at night." He was fascinated by her rare coquettish behavior. Lan Yu hugged her and kissed her lips. "I'm the one who worked hard." Qin Chen's fingers gently poked his shoulder. "The first rule of lovers is that as my boyfriend, you have to give in to me." Lan Yu caught her fingers. His eyes were deep. "Don't play with fire." She chuckled and leaned on his shoulder. She was a little naughty. "It's you who can't control yourself." "You can't control yourself," she hinted with her slender legs. "I can't control myself." Lan Yu chuckled. "I can't control myself now. Will you accompany me?" Qin Chen bit her lips. "You're a beast." Lan Yu chuckled hoarsely. "You sit in the office every day. You used to be an artist too. Tell me, where did you get your six-pack? Where did you get your energy from?" Qin Chen snorted. Actually, she had always had some moves in the past, but God had really wasted her skin. Not to mention abs, she could not even train her waistline. Until now, her waistline was still smooth. As soon as the clothes were taken off, the woman came out. Lan Yu chuckled. "It's probably because I want to meet you." "So, you like me very much?" Qin Chen lay in his arms and bit him. If you like me, I'll go make breakfast. She propped herself up and gave him a morning kiss. I'm going to take a shower, and then I'll wear your shirt as a reward, okay? Lan Yu gazed at her for a long time before he chuckled. It sounds very tempting. He hugged her. Let's wash together. I'll make breakfast for you after. She did not reject him and allowed him to serve her. Lan Yu doted on her so much that he did not even need to lift a finger. Moreover, he fed her until she was full, as though she was a piglet. Qin Chen lay on the sofa and hooked her leg around him. Lan Yu, this kind of life seems a little too depraved. No, I have to go to the hospital tomorrow. Then, she complained again. I'm really afraid that if I have to undergo surgery, my legs will go weak after standing for 2 hours. This bastard, he could stand for 4 to 5 hours. She really did not know if his body was made of iron. Or, were all men such beasts? Chapter 2780. Lan Yu kissed her and said, I'm going to cook. She put her arms around his neck and said, I can cook, but I can't make love. Lan Yu looked down at her face and chuckled, where's the karate master? He kissed the tip of her nose and said, fancy moves but not practical moves. Qin Chen bit him and kicked him with her long legs. Go cook. Okay, Your Majesty. Lan Yu lowered his head and chuckled. Qin Chen pulled him over and kissed him again. I'll learn to cook for you in the future. Lan Yu's eyes were a little deep. This was probably the most beautiful words of love he had ever heard, especially for someone like Qin Chen. He believed that he was very important in her heart to be able to say such words. He wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything and just kissed her lips. He went to cook and washed an apple for her. It was red and moist. Qin Chen bit it and read a magazine. Lan Yu saw that she was looking at women's clothes, but most of them were more neutral. Even so, he was already very satisfied. He knew that it wasn't easy to change a person who had been persisting and believing for so long. So he hugged her from behind and kissed her. Sit up and look. It hurts your eyes. I like lying like this, Qin Chen said like a rascal. And Lan Yu found that he seemed to like her rascal. She was acting like a spoiled child, which was something that Qin Chen didn't realize herself. In the end, Lan Yu even bit her apple. Qin Chen bit his face. Don't steal my apple. His eyes were clear as he stared at her, as if he was asking for sex again. No more. Qin Chen put down the apple and hugged his neck. Her voice was a little low. It hurts a little. Lan Yu's gaze was a little unpredictable. After a long time, he kissed her. I'll buy you some medicine later. Unexpectedly, Qin Chen didn't object. He smiled and went to help her cook. While Qin Chen was happily eating, Lan Yu took a cigarette and went downstairs to the pharmacy to buy medicine for her. When he applied the ointment on Qin Chen, it was rare for them to be so violent that the two of them got into a fight. This was probably the best time in one's life. On Monday, Lan Yu drove Qin Chen to the hospital. She had to check Mr. Lin's body today. Mr. Lin was busy every day and had stayed in the hospital for a long time. The situation was changing rapidly and he did not dare to recuperate. Qin Chen was wearing a white robe. After examining Mr. Lin's body, he took off his mask and smiled. You can leave the hospital now, but you'd better rest well. At this time, there was no one else in the ward. Mr. Lin sat up and smiled bitterly. How can I rest in such a position? Qin Chen responded with a smile and didn't say much. She was still very cautious when it came to Zhengyi. Mr. Lin changed the topic. I heard that Cici and Dr. Qin are quite close. Qin Chen smiled. Miss Lin is quite cute, but my heart already belongs to someone. Mr. Lin chuckled. Is it the young man named Lan Yu? Qin Chen was dressed in men's clothes and nodded with a smile. Yes. Mr. Lin's expression was a little stunned, but then he smiled. It's not bad. Young people nowadays dare to say and do what they want. It's different from our era. Qin Chen looked at him. Sorry. Chapter 2781. He added, if Cece pesters you again, tell me and I'll teach her a lesson. Her mother is soft-hearted and can't control her, but she's always afraid of me. Speaking of this, Mr. Qin felt a little regretful. I've been busy with work all these years and neglected my family. It hasn't been easy for Cece's mother either. He sighed. Cece can tell me if she's being naughty. If she's talking about a good relationship, I hope you can forgive her. I've always hoped for an outstanding person to guide Cece. She's like a lost lamb and can't find her home. Qin Chen cursed in her heart. Can't find her home. Why didn't he find a shepherd dog for Lin Cece? She felt that Mr. Lin was really good at politics. He had a way with words, trying to trick people into believing him. Mr. Lin looked at Qin Chen and smiled. Dr. Qin, what's wrong? You don't look too good. Qin Chen smiled reluctantly. No, I just slept late last night. Mr. Lin nodded understandingly. Young people don't sleep early like us old people. Qin Chen nodded. Then Mr. Lin, I'll help you with the discharge procedures. She walked to the door and suddenly turned around. She smiled faintly. Mr. Lin, Lan Yu is my boyfriend. Mr. Lin was surprised. Oh, I see. Qin Chen's gaze was calm. Yes. I can only be his girlfriend because I'm a girl and I've been like this since I was young. This time, Mr. Lin was shocked. He looked at Qin Chen up and down. He couldn't tell at all. Originally, he wanted to ask Qin Chen to follow him and work by his side. It would be convenient for Cece, but now, Qin Chen said that she was a woman. Mr. Lin was stunned and couldn't come back to his senses for a long time. So, Qin Chen can only thank you for your kindness. Qin Chen smiled faintly and walked out, closing the door. It was a pity that Mr. Lin was in the ward. Although there were rumors that Qin Chen and Lan Yu were a couple, he still admired Qin Chen's character. But now, Cece was probably going to be disappointed. Thinking that his wife had to comfort his daughter again, he rubbed his forehead, feeling a headache. Qin Chen walked out and felt a headache coming on. But now that he had made things clear, Lin Cece probably wouldn't bother him anymore. She walked towards the elevator, thinking that she would call Lan Yu later to tell him about it. Well, that's the girlfriend's responsibility. As she walked, she took out her phone. Just as she was about to make a call, her gaze froze. In the elevator, there was a man standing with his face tilted. Although it was only the side of his face, Qin Chen's whole body seemed to be frozen. She whispered softly, Rong Lei. Rong Lei. Rong Lei. The elevator closed in front of her. She shook her head, looked at the number, and quickly ran toward the safety stairs. It was Rong Lei. She was sure that it was him. Qin Chen ran madly on the safety stairs. This was the 22nd floor. She ran at an astonishing speed, but she couldn't catch up to the elevator. And here, there was only one elevator. When she ran to the first floor, her legs were already weak. Panting, she looked around. The elevator was empty. There was no one. She ran for a long time, but there was still no one. Qin Chen searched for a long time, but everything was like an illusion. It was as if that person had never appeared. Finally, she walked into the elevator. There was a faint smell of cologne. It went into the tip of her nose. Qin Chen closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. Chapter 2782. Qin Chen's body slowly slid down. She fell into the elevator and covered her face with her fingers. It had been so many years. It had been at least 10 years since she was young. That person had always been in her heart and she had never gotten rid of him. After so long, she still mistook him for someone else. Qin Chen stretched out her fingers and looked at them with trembling hands. After a long time, she said to herself, Qin Chen, it was all an illusion. He was gone. Rong Lei was gone. It was just a man who looked like him. Yes, it couldn't be him. He was no longer there. That leap had already ended his life. Qin Chen's face was already covered in tears. She stood in the elevator and looked at her own eyes. In the past, she had never thought that one day she would forget that part of the past. But just when she wanted to get over it, she realized that the past had become a demon in her heart. In the mirror, there were tears on her face. They were tears that she hadn't shed for many years. She stood in the elevator alone for a long time. It wasn't until Lan Yu called that she woke up. She reached out and answered the phone hesitantly. Chen, I'll pick you up at noon. Lan Yu stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window in the office and looked at the blue sky and white clouds outside. He was in a good mood. Zi said that there is a restaurant that serves really good food. Qin Chen was a foodie and he was willing to spoil her. Even if he drove for an hour to take her out for lunch, he wouldn't find it troublesome. At night, he was more willing to cook in his villa or her apartment, drink a glass of red wine and spend a pleasant night. As Lan Yu spoke, a gentle smile appeared on his handsome face. Qin Chen was silent for a moment and said in a low voice, I might not be able to do it at noon. I have an emergency surgery later. Lan Yu complained, you don't belong to Xing Yuan now and they still use you like this. This surgery is quite risky. Qin Chen leaned against the wall and said quietly, I can't talk to you anymore. I have to prepare for the surgery. With that, she hung up. Lan Yu wanted to say something, but the other side had already hung up. He let out a long sigh and shrugged. After thinking about it, he still ordered a vegetarian restaurant's takeaway for her. He was especially careful with his order, and the final instructions were 2 lines long. After that, Lan Yu looked out of the window and smiled. Would Qin Chen think that he was too clingy? A girl like Qin Chen should be more independent. However, after spending the past few days with her, he felt that she wasn't. On the contrary, if someone was willing to take care of her, she would be very confused and dependent. He liked it too. So now, he was a little disappointed. Lan Yu smiled at himself. It was a faint smile, but he was in an extremely good mood. This was probably how people in love were like. He reached out his hand and pressed it against his forehead. Then, he picked up his phone and opened her photo. A day apart feels like an autumn. Xingyuan Hospital. Qin Chen was sitting in her office. She had made 5 cups of coffee for herself, but none of them tasted as good as she wanted. In the end, she gave up. She stood in front of the window and took out a long and thin cigarette, smoking it slowly. She rarely smoked, but other than smoking, she didn't want to do anything else today. As long as she closed her eyes, she would think of that face. Rong Lei. Qin Chen took a deep puff of her cigarette. She would never be like this. It was because the shock she received today was too strong. There was a knock on the door. She turned her head and stared at the door. Chapter 2783. There was a knock on the door. She turned her head and stared at the door. It was as if a face that she couldn't get out of her mind would suddenly appear behind the door. After a long time, the knocking on the door continued. She pursed her lips and finally went to open the door. A delicate-looking delivery boy stood at the door. When he saw Qin Chen, he was obviously stunned. I'm looking for Dr. Qin. He was holding an exquisite takeout box in his hand. It looked like a high-class meal that cost a few hundred yuan. Qin Chen looked at him. That's me. The delivery boy had never seen such a good-looking man. For some reason, he blushed and tried to explain, I'm looking for a female doctor. That's me. Qin Chen's tone was indifferent. Then, the delivery man was stunned and looked at Qin Chen from head to toe. Qin Chen took the takeout box in his hand. Mine? The delivery boy finally came back to his senses. He said softly, yes. Oh, by the way, this is a note from Mr. Lon. The delivery boy carefully took the note. It's a note from Mr. Lon Yu. We printed it in our shop. Please accept it, Dr. Qin. Qin Chen took it. Then I'm leaving. The delivery boy stared at Qin Chen as he retreated. Qin Chen smiled and closed the door. After the door was closed, the world was separated again. Only she and Lan Yu's heart-shaped takeout were left. Qin Chen opened it gently. The food was very sumptuous. Moreover, it was really childish for a grown-up to ask for heart-shaped rice. She chuckled softly and picked up the note on the side. There were a few lines on it. It was a poem from the Tang dynasty. Qin Chen looked at it for a long time. Then, she put the note in her drawer and looked at the takeout. She really couldn't eat it anymore. In the end, she threw it into the trash can. She sat on the chair and smoked from afternoon to night. At 8:00, the phone on the table rang. She picked it up. Over there was Lan Yu. He seemed to be a little cautious. Qin Chen, are you off work? I'll get off work soon, Qin Chen said after thinking for a while. Then, he walked toward the bathroom with his phone in hand. Lan Yu's voice was light. I'm at the supermarket now. Do you want me to pick you up? There's a car in the hospital parking lot, I'll drive home myself. Qin Chen sounded a little tired. Lan Yu, I'm going back to the apartment today. I'm a little tired. I'll go to your place tomorrow. Lan Yu was silent for a while, then said in a low voice, if you're tired, can't you give me a chance to take care of you? Qin Chen, we're a couple now. He continued, I'm not being unreasonable. I just don't want to be pushed away by you anymore. Qin Chen was stunned for a moment, and then smiled lightly. Then come to my apartment. See you later. She agreed very readily, but Lan Yu was not very happy. Instead, his heart was heavy. He could feel that there was something on Qin Chen's mind. An hour later, when they met at Qin Chen's apartment, he was even more sure. Although Qin Chen had taken a shower, he still smelled a strong smell of cigarettes on her. He frowned. He remembered that she told him that she had an important operation. If that was the case, she wouldn't have had time to smoke so much. Qin Chen was never a person who liked cigarettes. Lan Yu kissed her for a while and said in a low voice, rest for a while. I'm going to Qin Fan. Chapter 2784. She sat there with her back straight. Her gray shirt and coffee-colored trousers made her look very handsome. As a man, Lan Yu had to admit that he was inferior to her. He looked at her quietly. She seemed to be immersed in her own world, and he was forgotten by her. He shook his head and told himself that it was just his illusion. In fact, it wasn't like that. Qin Chen was just in a bad mood and too tired. He tried hard to convince himself. Finally, he went into the kitchen and made a sumptuous dinner. Qin Chen had only moved a few times when Lan Yu said, did you like the lunch today? Qin Chen was stunned for a moment, and then she smiled faintly. It was pretty good. It's good that you like it. Lan Yu looked at her and said slowly, this restaurant is very good at takeout. If you are too tired at noon, I can order for you every day. No need. Qin Chen said quickly, and then he looked at her more deeply. Qin Chen changed her words. Okay. Lan Yu smiled and grabbed her hand. I thought you would complain that I won't accompany you at noon. Qin Chen looked at his hand and was stunned for a long time. Then she whispered, do you want to have lunch together at noon? Of course, we are in the phase of love now. Lan Yu smiled. Qin Chen was a little stunned again, in the phase of love. Then what was Ronglei? Her originally determined mood was a little fuzzy now. She was very confused, and she needed to calm down. She had no appetite and only ate a little reluctantly. However, all of this was seen by Lan Yu. He didn't say anything and quietly cleaned up the apartment. He went to take a shower. When he came out, Qin Chen was still sitting in front of the piano playing a song. He had never heard the song before, but the melody was very nice. Lan Yu only had a bath towel around his waist, and he quietly wiped himself with a towel in his hand. When she finished playing, he threw down the towel and hugged her from behind. "Qin Chen, don't play anymore." His hand gently rubbed her fingers, and his voice was also indifferent. "I will feel sorry for you." Qin Chen didn't move, but just sat quietly. Lan Yu's thin lips kissed her neck, and his voice was low. "Can you tell me what happened?" "Qin Chen, I am worried about you." "You are worried about me?" Qin Chen's voice was a little hoarse. She looked up and looked into his unfathomable eyes. Lan Yu's answer was to kiss the corner of her mouth, bit by bit, and comfort her little by little. Qin Chen's hand on his waist, and then he smiled. "Lan Yu, of Qin," he said. "Qin Chen, Yu, Qin, and Qin Lan." Lan Yu was stunned for a moment, then he smiled. "Of course not. Although medicine is very advanced now, it's not very possible." Lan Yu looked down, and his voice was very low. "But there was once a person who had such an ability." Lan Yu sat next to her. "Qin Chen." He frowned, feeling the danger. Yes, he was worried about her now. Qin Chen was a very rational person, and she would never talk nonsense. "It was my mentor." Qin Chen's voice was very low. "But he is no longer here." Lan Yu didn't quite understand. She looked at him and said very softly, "This requires both the ability to go back in time and the top medical technology." Lan Yu frowned. "Go back in time." To be precise, it is to reverse a person's physical function to the point where it can be cured. Qin Chen explained, and her voice was a little blank. "My mentor has experimented on animals, but humans, he has never done it." Chapter 2785. Lan Yu looked at her pale face. "Qin Chen, did you find out that someone is using this technology now?" Otherwise, he believed that she wouldn't have mentioned it, and this kind of black technology would have been buried forever. Because it was too dangerous. If it was obtained by an ambitious person, the world would be overturned. Qin Chen looked at Lan Yu and smiled faintly. "No. It's just that today is the anniversary of my mentor's death, so I thought of it." Lan Yu hugged her and kissed her hair. "Don't think too much." Qin Chen looked down and didn't say anything. Lan Yu carried her to the master bedroom. In fact, he didn't have that kind of intention, but he hoped that something could distract her. He put her on the bed and kissed her as if he was worshipping her. Her clothes fell to the ground one by one. He was aroused and whispered in her ear. But when he wanted her, Qin Chen suddenly woke up from her intoxication. "Lan Yu." She gently pushed him away and looked a little hoarse. "Sorry, I'm a little tired. I don't want to do it." Lan Yu turned over and lay flat on the side. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her again. "It's okay." He kissed her forehead for a while, then let go of her and said in a low voice, "I'm going to the bathroom." Qin Chen knew what he was going to do and felt a little guilty. She lay flat for a long time, trying to get rid of the figure in her mind. Qin Chen had never thought that the unforgettable memory would become a haunting nightmare for her. In the end, she opened the bathroom door. She could imagine what Lan Yu was doing. At that moment, there was a subtle uneasiness in the air. Qin Chen looked at him, walked over and threw herself into Lan Yu's arms. She put her little face on his shoulder and whispered, "I'll help you." Lan Yu couldn't believe his good luck, but he really couldn't bear to let her do this. Thus, he said in a slightly hoarse voice, "I'll do it myself." He hugged her and pressed her body into his embrace. Qin Chen listened to his overly excited gasps and felt even more guilty in her heart. She raised her head and kissed him. Lan Yu, do you love me very much? He paused for a moment before replying, I love you very much. Then, a certain man became a quick shooter. He was barely a few seconds away. In the air, things were even more subtle. Qin Chen's cold mood improved a little. He leaned on his shoulder and laughed softly. Lan Yu was a little annoyed. When he calmed down, he reached out and pinched the tip of her nose. It's all your fault. Qin Chen looked at him eagerly. Why is it me? Because of you, I'm cold to you. Lan Yu pressed against her and murmured, do you want to make amends now? Men cared a lot about this kind of thing, especially in front of their women. Qin Chen chuckled softly. Is that so? You can do whatever you want. Lan Yu stared at her eyes without moving his eyes. After a long time, he suddenly stretched out his hand and pinned her body against the hot wall. Lan Yu. Qin Chen was a little uneasy and called his name in a low voice. There was a touch of fanaticism in Lan Yu's eyes. Be good, I'll make you happier. Qin Chen's pupils dilated as she watched him squat down. Thus, this night became a little painful and a little messy. Late at night, Lan Yu turned over and reached out to the person beside him. Chapter 2786. Qin Chen didn't like to sleep in his arms, but it didn't matter after he fell asleep, so he often hugged her in the middle of the night. But Lan Yu's hand missed. He frowned and opened his eyes to look at the emptiness in the darkness. He raised his hand and the light was turned on. Qin Chen wasn't in the bedroom. Lan Yu sat up, lifted the quilt, and walked to the living room naked. There was a slight smell of smoke in the dark living room. Although the windows were open and the wind was strong, Lan Yu could still feel it. In the dim light, he saw Qin Chen standing in front of the French window. She had changed into a set of daily clothes and was smoking by the window. He was sure that some of what Qin Chen had said tonight was true and some was false. She was upset because of what she had discovered. Lan Yu watched quietly, but Qin Chen had already noticed him. She turned her head, looked at him for a moment, put out the cigarette, and said calmly, Did I wake you up? Lan Yu walked over and said, I found you weren't here, so I came out. He took the cigarette butt from her hand. Why are you smoking again? It's better for girls to smoke less. He didn't object to her smoking because he knew that she had been used to it over the years. She was usually very abstemious and not a heavy smoker. She might only smoke 1 or 2 cigarettes a week. But tonight, Lan Yu looked at the dozen cigarette butts in the ashtray, which was enough to show how upset she was. If you have something on your mind, maybe you can share it with me, he said casually and took her to the sofa without turning on the light. Sometimes, the night could make people relax. He placed Qin Chen on his shoulder and turned his head to kiss her cheek. He didn't force her to answer. Qin Chen's world and his were not the same world. Unless Qin Chen was willing to say it, he couldn't force her. Qin Chen shook her head. Maybe she's too tired. She didn't see Lan Yu's disappointed eyes. She was so upset and still hadn't told him anything, which meant that she hadn't opened her heart to him yet. Lan Yu sighed slightly and didn't say anything else. He just hugged her. She leaned into his embrace and watched the sky turn white. She murmured, It's a new day. Lan Yu smiled. Chen Chen, just like your name, you will have a new day every day. He watched with her, the sun leaping up. In the next few days, although Qin Chen looked normal, Lan Yu could clearly feel the changes in her. She was no longer as clingy as before. She began to like playing the piano. She began to like standing in front of the French windows for an entire night. Of course, her addiction to smoking seemed to be getting stronger and stronger. Every day at noon, he still sent someone to deliver her lunch, a lunchbox. Because she did not have time to accompany him for lunch, she would be very busy every day, except at night, he could not see her. This kind of life slowly made Lan Yu a little impetuous. In love, the most terrible thing was that the heart was not clear. He thought that maybe Qin Chen hadn't thought it through. She was regretting it now. He liked her and loved her. Naturally, he wanted her to be well and happy. If she said that she hadn't thought it through, he could still give her a little more time. Lan Yu sat in the car, smoking and looking at the hospital building in front of him. His mother had taken an X-ray here before, and he came to get it on the way. It was 12:00 in the afternoon, but as her boyfriend, he was a little hesitant about whether he should go upstairs to look for her. Chapter 2787. They had actually become the most familiar strangers. After smoking a cigarette, he finally decided to go and see her. She was a girl, so he had to take a step back. It was every boyfriend's duty to care about her when she had something on her mind. Lan Yu opened the car door and walked straight to the hospital lobby. Along the way, he met many familiar nurses. When the nurses saw him, they all smiled and greeted him. Qin Chen grabbed a nurse and asked, "Is Dr. Qin here?" At 10:30 in the morning, he called to pick up a scan. Qin Chen said that she was going to have surgery soon and would only be out at 2 in the afternoon. So he wasn't sure if she could eat at this time. The nurse looked at him and was a little surprised. Of course Dr. Qin is here. He came over these days just to check in. The hospital didn't assign him any tasks. Lan Yu frowned, but after a moment, he lowered his eyes and said, "Got it." He walked towards the elevator. In the elevator, he saw that his expression was a little ugly. He told himself that Qin Chen wasn't an ordinary girl. She just didn't like to be too intimate. She just liked to have her own personal space. When the elevator reached that floor, he walked out. When he stood at the door of Qin Chen's office, he actually felt nervous like never before. He reached out and knocked on the door. After 5 seconds, a slightly hoarse voice came from inside. "Come in." Lan Yu opened the door. Qin Chen happened to look up. Their eyes met. Her eyes were full of surprise. Then, she asked very slowly, "Why are you here?" "Didn't I say that my mother's scan was coming, so I came to take a look?" Lan Yu said, pretending to be relaxed. Then, just as he was about to casually ask if she had eaten, his eyes swept to the rubbish bin at the side. Inside, there was a neatly packed lunchbox, which had not been opened yet. He asked someone to send it. She told him that the lunchbox was good and that she ate it every day. So, she didn't eat it and threw it into the rubbish bin without even looking at it. At this moment, Lan Yu's mood was indescribably sour. It was like a child trying to give something to an adult, but the adult didn't even have the desire to look at it. His eyes narrowed, but he still smiled, even if it was a very stiff smile. He said hoarsely, "Qin Chen." Qin Chen's gaze also fell on the trash can. She stared at it for a long time before looking up at him. Lan Yu exhaled. "You rest. I have an important meeting to attend in the afternoon." He even squeezed out a smile. "I'll make you your favorite curry rice tonight." Just as he was about to leave, Qin Chen stopped him. "Lan Yu, let's split up for now." With his back to her, Lan Yu clenched his fists. Qin Chen, temporarily separate. He turned his head and looked at her. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Lan Yu, I'm sorry. I haven't been in a good mood recently. This is unfair to you. So, let's separate for now." "So, when you're in a good mood, you'll summon me and visit me?" "Really?" Lan Yu wasn't without a temper, but he always gave in to her. Qin Chen pursed her lips. "That's not what I meant." "Then what do you mean?" Lan Yu's voice was low. "Do you think this is fair to me?" He said word by word, husband and wife, or lovers. "Qin Chen, do you understand the meaning of these 2 words?" Chapter 2788. Qin Chen lowered his eyes. "Lan Yu, it's not that I don't care about you. Don't think that way, I need time. She looked at him and said softly, I'm serious about you, and I'm serious about what I said. Lan Yu, I'm sorry, but I really can't. Lan Yu stared into her eyes, his gaze burning. After a long time, he suddenly smiled faintly. How long do I have to wait? 1 year, 2 years, or a lifetime? Men could be sharp sometimes, and he said straightforwardly, Qin Chen, how long will it take for you to forget him? Qin Chen's expression changed slightly, and then it became a little ugly. Lan Yu. Did I hit the nail on the head? Lan Yu's voice was very low. Qin Chen, but I still want to believe you this once. I'll wait for you to find me. By the end, his voice was already hoarse. In this relationship, Lan Yu was too proactive, too humble. He treated Qin Chen like a god, but such love was nothing in her heart. He, Lan Yu, was just a person in a vegetative state, and the person in her heart was a dead person. Did she want him to fight a zombie in a vegetative state? Lan Yu's eyes were dyed with a storm, but he loved her too much, so he didn't want to force her. He left, and when he walked to the door, he paused for a moment. In the future, eat something for lunch. If it's not to your liking, then, remember to eat it yourself. After he said that, he walked out in a straight line. As for Qin Chen, her heart was sour and bitter, and she couldn't put it into words. She knew that she had let Lan Yu down, and she had let him down. She had gone back on what she had promised. No, she was swaying left and right. She clearly wanted to forget that part of the past, but after seeing that person who looked so similar, she couldn't control herself. She didn't stop Lan Yu from leaving. Because she couldn't give him anything right now. She couldn't give him a normal life, and she couldn't give him love. She had always been a decisive person, and continuing this kind of life was torturous for her. She could feel that she had hurt him. Therefore, it was better to temporarily separate. Qin Chen stared blankly at the door for a long time before picking up the unopened lunchbox. She opened the bag and then the lid of the box. It was still filled with the rice made with love. It was very fragrant, and there were also her favorite dishes. She looked at it for a while, took the spoon, and ate little by little until it was all gone. Finally, she took out her phone, typed a message, and sent it out. I've finished my lunchbox. Lan Yu, I've never eaten anything from the trash before. After sending it out, she had been waiting, however, she did not receive a reply from him. Thinking that he was really angry, she sent another message. Send it to me tomorrow, okay? Still no reply. Qin Chen stared at his phone in a daze. He was really angry. But she didn't expect that on the other end of the line, Lin Cece was sitting in front of the computer. Her slender fingers tapped a few times, and then she looked at the man behind her. Alright, I've hacked her phone. Every message she sends to Lan Yu will be sent to your phone. Of course, there was also her phone, but she was smart enough not to mention it. The man behind her was tall and slender, wearing a high-end custom-made Armani suit. Lin Cece thought that it must have been hard on him to dress like this on such a hot day. Chapter 2789. This kind of cold temperament was somewhat familiar to her. She thought for a long time before she remembered, Qin Chen seemed to be this type. She and the man in front of her were very similar, not only in appearance, but in behavior and temperament, they were very similar. They must have been imitating each other for a long time to be so similar. Lin Cece smiled, and her smile was a little playful, so that was it. She looked at the man in front of her and smiled sweetly. Are you Qin Chen's ex-boyfriend? Rong Lei's eyes were deep and very cold. It's none of your business. After we worked together, you think it's none of my business? Lin Cece chuckled and typed a line of code on the notebook with her fingers, and then a string of information appeared. Rong Lei, the first heir of a Chinese family in France, died 12 years ago. Lin Cece looked at Rong Lei and smiled. Now Mr. Rong is still alive and well. Can you explain? Rong Lei narrowed his eyes, and there was already danger in his eyes. Lin Cece raised her head slightly. You don't dare to kill me. I have made more than 10 copies of our meeting or the video. If something happens to me, your identity as a third world person will be exposed. Lin Cece stood up, looked at Rong Lei, and said coldly, it doesn't matter if you die, but I don't know if the organization behind Mr. Rong can tolerate it. Has anyone told you not to be too smart? Rong Lei's eyes were cold. Lin Cece chuckled, if you are not smart enough to cooperate with a zombie like Mr. Rong, your brain will be bitten out by Mr. Rong in minutes. She said the most bloody words with the sweetest smile. Rong Lei squinted and stared at her. After a long time, he smiled faintly. He leaned over, put his lips on Lin Cece's lips, and whispered, I am a human. His lips were very warm. Lin Cece looked up and stared at his eyes. She stretched out her slender little finger and put it on his heart, but this heart has changed. Rong Lei's black eyes locked on her for a long time, and then he slowly walked away. Lin Cece chuckled. It was really interesting, a person who came back from the dead. There must be a big secret behind him, and this secret must be related to Qin Chen. Otherwise, this man who was full of faith would not come back to find Qin Chen. In other words, the most important thing in this man's heart was never Qin Chen. It was him, the so-called faith. Lin Cece smiled unrestrainedly. Qin Chen, Qin Chen. Nu, or Qin Chen, Lin Cece of the Qin Chen, Qin Chen. Rong Lei held his phone and looked at the message that Qin Chen sent to the man. Chen of Qin of Qin of Qin. Qin Qin Qin. Qin of Qin of Qin 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 Qin's love. Chen. Qin of Qin of Chen. Chen. Rong Lei closed his eyes slightly, and he could still imagine the scene of his morning entangled with that man on that stormy night. He can't forget that scene. He raised his head, and his Adam's apple moved slightly. It was extremely sexy. Anna approached him gently, leaned over, and kissed his Adam's apple. While kissing, she murmured, just take her back. Why waste time? Rong Lei suddenly opened his eyes and looked at Anna. Chapter 2790. Anna's body froze for a moment before she retreated and lowered her head respectfully. I was rash, young Master Rong. Rong Lei's long and narrow eyes were filled with a storm. However, his voice was deep and slow. What I want is not only Chen, but also her heart. Anna's heart skipped a beat and she didn't dare to say another word. Xingyuan Hospital. Qin Chen looked at her phone. She had checked her phone more than 10 times in the afternoon. However, she didn't get a reply. Before she got off work, she thought about it and decided to give him a call. After the phone rang 7 or 8 times, it was finally picked up. Lan Yu's voice was a little hoarse. What's the matter? He was indifferent. Qin Chen wasn't easy to talk to. She hesitated for a moment before asking, I sent you a few messages, but you didn't reply. Are you going to make up with me and welcome me to your apartment immediately? Lan Yu's tone wasn't good. Qin Chen sighed. Must you do this? Lan Yu smiled faintly. He sat in the car and said quietly, Qin Chen, in your heart, I'm an unreasonable man, am I? Or are you coaxing me like a child? Anyway, I'm easy to coax, so you can come and go as you please, right? Qin Chen felt a sense of helplessness. She was silent for a long time before saying softly, if you're not in the mood to talk now and you must do this, then let's talk another day. Then, she waited for him to hang up. However, Lan Yu didn't. He didn't hang up, but he didn't say anything either. The two of them were frozen like that, and they could only hear each other's breathing. After a long time, Qin Chen sighed. Let's do this first. Let's have a meal together when we're free. This was the biggest concession she could make. She really wasn't in the mood or the ability to live with him. Rong Lei's past was like a black hole, leading her down. She couldn't do anything. And these were things she couldn't say out loud. Finally, she murmured, I need time. You have to think it through. Do you want to be with me, right? Lan Yu said indifferently, you don't mind if I go to the mirror, do you? Is that what you mean? Qin Chen was speechless for a moment. After a moment, she whispered, I believe you won't be unfair to me. These words still angered him. Lan Yu cursed, you're fucking being like this. Is that fair to me? With that, he hung up. Qin Chen looked at his phone and couldn't help but roll his eyes. Childish. However, the childish man did not call her again. To be honest, she was still a little disappointed. Qin Chen scolded himself for being cheap and unreasonable. She wasn't like this in the past. Actually, Lan Yu was right. It was because he was too accommodating to her that she would easily say that they were going to separate temporarily. Qin. Or rather, he thought that he had been played by her. Qin Chen tidied up the table. She thought about it and decided to go to Qin Mu's place for dinner. She hadn't been there for days, and Zhou Chongguang needed to be checked. Moreover, perhaps after going there, his mood would be a little better. Qin Chen took off her white robe, picked up her coat and walked out. She entered the elevator and looked at herself in the mirror. She couldn't help thinking about the person she had met in the elevator that day. She closed her eyes and forced the image out of her mind. She had to do it. She didn't want to be affected by the past anymore. Chapter 2791. Walking into the parking lot, she opened the car door and got in. Just as she was about to start the car, a black limousine passed by slowly from behind. The window of the back seat was open, and she could see the person in the back seat from where she was. That familiar side profile appeared once again. He was handsome, with a touch of coldness and elegance. Qin Chen's gaze froze. She couldn't look away until she couldn't see it anymore. When she wanted to chase after him, she had no strength in her legs, and her whole body was covered in hot sweat. She had never thought that one day, Rong Lei would become her nightmare. He appeared again and again. Was it someone else, or was it her illusion? Because she was with Lan Yu, she always mistook others for him. Sitting in the car, Qin Chen took out a cigarette and smoked it slowly. She needed to calm down. At this moment, she actually hoped that it was just an illusion. She didn't know if this thought was because of Lan Yu or something else. With trembling hands, she took a drag of the cigarette. She told herself that she must have mistaken him for someone else. That person was gone. It was her guilt. It was because she didn't keep her promise that she felt that he was back. Her face rested against the window, and her gaze was a little hollow. She smoked furiously, one cigarette after another, and smoked furiously. She felt that she was sick and had a hallucination. It wasn't until the phone in the middle of the car rang that Qin Chen came back to her senses. It was a call from Qin Mu. She picked up the phone. Qin Mu's voice was gentle. Qin Chen, are you coming? Dinner is ready. Qin Chen's gaze was a little indifferent. I'll be there soon. Okay, Qin Mu said, drive slowly. After hanging up, Qin Chen finished the cigarette in his hand and stepped on the accelerator. When they arrived at the villa where Qin Chen and Zhou Chongguang lived, it was already 8:00 at night. The night was cool, and the whole villa had a little warmth. Qin Chen walked into the hall. Zhou Chongguang was resting on the sofa, while Qin Mu was pacing back and forth with her belly in her hands. Later, Zhou Chongguang put down the magazine in his hand and pulled Qin Mu over to sit down. He placed his palm on her lower abdomen, gently caressing it. Qin Mu looked at him and smiled. That was the most ordinary happiness. Qin Chen was a little stunned as he watched. For so many years, she had always been alone. She had also seen many loving scenes of her parents and family, but she had never been moved. But now, she actually felt a little envious. Qin Mu looked up and found her standing there. She smiled faintly. "You're here. Dinner can be served." As she stood up, Zhou Chongguang naturally supported her and said in a low voice, "Walk slowly. I'm not made of glass." Qin Mu glanced at him and then came over to hold Qin Chen's arm. "I haven't seen you for a few days. Why have you lost weight? I heard from Cher that Lan Yu's cooking is very good. Why didn't he feed you more?" She reached out and pinched Qin Chen's face. She felt a little dull. He was originally thin, but now he looked even more haggard. Furthermore, Qin Mu could clearly smell the smell of cigarettes. She was stunned for a moment. "You smoked?" Qin Chen nodded. "I was a little upset, so I smoked a few." Qin Mu snorted. "This smell is not just a few. Tell me, what happened?" Qin Chen went to wash his hands. "Nothing, just a little annoyed at work." "No way." Qin Mu pursed her lips. "Tell me the truth." Chapter 2792. The little guy could already sit in a small chair. Qin Mu asked someone to make him mashed potatoes and steamed eggs, which were delicious. Little Shui Mu ate happily. Qin Chen was a little absent-minded. She looked at Shui Mu for a long time and smiled. "You're so big now. You used to be a little monkey." She asked Zhou Chongguang, "How's your digestion?" "It's all good." There was tenderness in Zhou Chongguang's eyes. He first looked at Shui Mu, and then at his wife. He likes Mu Mu very much. He sleeps with Mu Mu in his arms every night. Qin Chen smiled and said, "That's a good thing." Zhou Chongguang smiled slightly, and his eyes were full of love. Qin Chen lowered her head to eat, but it was obvious that the pregnant woman did not want to let her go. After repeated questioning, Qin Chen said in a daze, "Oh, I'm temporarily separated from Lan Yu. It's my problem." Qin Mu asked sharply, "Is it because you're separated from Lan Yu, or is it because of your smoking that you're separated from Lan Yu?" She beat around the bush, but Qin Chen still understood. After hesitating for a moment, she said in a low voice, "It's the latter." Qin Mu bit her lip and reached out to cover Qin Chen's hand. "Chen, so many years have passed, and I've never said anything. But now I know that you must not be able to get over it, so you're not sure if you and Lan Yu can always be together. You're afraid that he'll fall deeper and deeper, so you said that you want to separate for the time being, right?" Qin Chen had always been smarter than Qin Mu. Qin Mu was always silly. At the age of 14, she fell in love with a man and couldn't extricate herself. She loved him crazily, and Qin Chen felt a lot guilty. But at this time, after experiencing so much, Qin Mu had a kind of calmness. Qin Chen had nowhere to hide. She looked at Qin Mu and sighed, "Do you have to be like this, fiery eyes of truth?" Qin Mu smiled. "Who asked us to stay in the same place and hug each other for 10 months? Qin Chen said nothing. At this time, Zhou Chongguang was almost done with his meal. He took the initiative to leave with little Shui Mu, giving them some privacy. Although they were all family, there were some words that were not convenient for a man like him to listen to. Especially Qin Chen's arrogant temperament. After Zhou Chongguang left, Qin Chen looked at his back and then at Qin Mu. He smiled and said, "You've trained him well." Qin Mu patted the back of her hand. "Don't change the subject. Tell me what's going on." Qin Chen's gaze fell on Qin Mu's face. After a long time, he said, "Qin Mu, I saw him." "Him?" Qin Mu pursed her lips and spat out a few words. "Rong Lei." This name was a taboo in the Qin family. No one dared to mention it for so many years. It was more taboo than the name of Cher. Because Rong Lei was dead and Qin Chen had frozen himself for so many years, the whole family was still very happy when she and Lan Yu were together. No matter what happened to Lan Yu, at least he was a decent person. Even if it was not for a long time, as long as it could make Qin Chen happy for a while, it was a good thing. It had to be said that this idea of the Qin family was not right. But they were not very optimistic about Lan Yu. After all, he had a grudge with Mu Yun and was married to Cher. Everyone in the Qin family was in a bad mood. It seemed that Qin Mu and Qin Chen's men all liked Cher. Forget about Zhou Chengguang, he just liked him, but Lan Yu was married. If he married Qin Chen, it would be strange. Moreover, no one would think that Qin Chen would get married. They all thought that Qin Chen was just doing it on a whim. But now, she was obviously serious. Her feelings for Lan Yu were not just for fun. Chapter 2793. Qin Chen pursed her lips and shook her head. I might have seen another person, but he looked very similar. So you're wavering, aren't you? Qin Mu put her hand on the back of Qin Chen's hand and asked in a low voice, what about Lan Yu? What did he say? He's angry. Qin Chen said softly, I sent him a message, but he didn't reply. Qin Mu smiled and said, Qin Chen, you're not the kind of person who will coax people casually, especially men. Qin Chen wouldn't have been willing to do it if it had been a flirting friend. But it was obvious that she cared about Lan Yu now, so she couldn't let it go. Qin Mu smiled and said, if you care, go and coax him back. Qin Chen, I can see that Lan Yu is sincere to you. If you like him, don't miss it. Qin Chen's expression was a little subtle. I'm afraid I can't give him happiness. Why don't you try? How do you know? Qin Mu's smile was very warm. Chen Chen, you've always been very smart, but if you want to come out, you have to accept something new. Only in this way can you get rid of the influence of Rong Lei on you. Qin Chen's expression was a little dazed. Mumu, can I really do it? Could she abandon the faith that she had held for more than 10 years just like that? After seeing that person, she felt very, very painful. She didn't want to bring her pain to Lan Yu. Qin Mu looked into her eyes and said, let go a little bit and let Lan Yu come in. He will slowly infiltrate your life. The muscles on Qin Chen's face trembled a little. After a long time, she suddenly whispered, Mumu, I got it. She pursed her lips and said, then I'll go first. Qin Mu grabbed her and said gently, let the driver send you. Qin Chen hesitated for a moment and nodded. Qin Mu called the driver and personally sent Qin Chen to the car. Qin Chen sat in the car and seemed to be thinking about something. Her expression had never been so gentle. Qin Mu waved at her and watched the black limousine drive away. In the car, the driver asked softly, where are you going, second miss? Qin Chen looked at the dark night outside and paused for a while before slowly telling him the name of Lan Yu's apartment. The driver nodded, turned the car around, and drove in that direction. In the villa, Zhou Chengguang approached slowly, took a knitted coat, and put it on Qin Mu's shoulder. It's cold at night. You've been standing for a long time. Let's go back. Qin Mu placed his hand on his shoulder and placed it on the back of his hand. He said softly, I'm a little worried about Qin Chen. Zhou Chengguang also looked into the distance, his gaze somewhat unreal. After a long time, he lowered his head and said, is her past bothering her? Qin Mu nodded. Yes, that man's name is Rong Lei, a very good-looking man. He is the heir of a French group, but 12 years ago, he jumped from the 22nd floor, and then, her voice lowered and she murmured, Qin Chen became like this. She imitated Rong Lei and turned herself into another Rong Lei. Zhou Chengguang frowned. Qin Mu turned around and said lightly, Rong Lei has a congenital heart disease. He is Qin Chen's patient. 12 years ago. How old was Qin Chen at that time? They grew up together. Rong Lei is 8 years older than Qin Chen. At that time, he was already an adult, and Qin Chen was only 12 years old. Qin Mu sighed. Chongguang has been like this for the past 12 years. Chapter 2794. He rubbed her long hair. Don't worry. Call her over for dinner when you're free, and then call Lan Yu. Qin Mu grunted in acknowledgement. Then, he thought of something. Tomorrow, meet with my big brother. Get him to investigate Rong Lei's situation. Zhou Chongguang looked at her and said slowly, Mumu, are you saying that Rong Lei is not dead? I can't rule out this possibility. Otherwise, why does Qin Chen keep meeting that person? Do you think it's a coincidence? Or a conspiracy? Qin Mu raised her head and looked into his eyes. Zhou Chongguang thought for a moment and patted her little head. Now that you mention it, I think it's somewhat credible. He reached out and held her in his arms. Let's go back first. Your hands are cold. Qin Mu nodded and obediently went in with him. Zhou Chongguang carried her to the master bedroom upstairs and brought her a cup of warm water. Then he went to call Yi Muyun. The call went through. He spoke for about 5 minutes, and Qin Mu sat on the bed and looked at him. There was gentleness in her eyes, and the way she looked at him was different from before. In the past, Qin Mu looked at Zhou Chongguang with admiration, but now it was different. Now they were equal and supporting each other. Such a life was plain but very warm. Qin Mu felt very satisfied. She looked at Zhou Chongguang walking over and smiled. What did my brother say? Zhou Chongguang walked over and sat down. His voice was a little low. Your brother said that people from the third world like Rong Lei can only be found through a special data network, and they might not be able to find him if he didn't use Rong Lei's identity in this world. Qin Mu looked at him with a puzzled look on her little face. If he's dead, we definitely won't be able to find anything. If he's alive, we might not be able to find anything either. Now we have to use all kinds of data to come up with an analysis. Zhou Chongguang sighed. But he's still alive. If he hasn't been seen for so long, I don't think he'll be easily found. Qin Mu lowered his eyes and nodded his head. Zhou Chongguang rubbed her hair. Don't worry. It depends on Qin Chen's heart. If she likes Lan Yu, no one can break them apart. As he spoke, he suddenly became serious. If Rong Lei is really alive, I think he's probably not the Rong Lei of the past, and he's not the person Qin Chen loves. If he really loves her, he wouldn't have made her suffer for so many years. I think so too. Qin Mu bit her lip and leaned her head in her husband's arms. Chongguang, I hope that Qin Chen can be with Lan Yu and live an ordinary life. Zhou Chongguang smiled bitterly. But Qin Chen is destined to be extraordinary. The advanced medical technology she mastered was destined to be extraordinary in her life. Zhou Chongguang suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart. If that person was not dead and he came to find Qin Chen now, was it because of Qin Chen or Qin Chen's identity? He didn't know, and he didn't even dare to imagine. Just as he was guessing, Qin Chen yawned and said in a low voice, My feet are so sore. Zhou Chongguang wanted to interrupt her and then looked at the little face on his shoulder, which was as fresh as a painting. She looked at him and said, Zhou Chongguang, you haven't kissed me for a long time. Zhou Chongguang touched his forehead and couldn't help laughing. He said in a low voice, Mumu. Qin Mu bit her lip. I want you to kiss me. Chapter 2795. Qin Mu blinked her eyes and placed her finger on her stomach. She said confidently, It's the one in my stomach that pulled down my average age. So, Zhou Chongguang, I'm only 12 years old now. He pinched her little face. Are you inviting me to kiss an underage girl? He carefully laid her down and leaned over to look at her. His eyes were clear. What I want to do may not be just a kiss. A 12-year-old girl, are you sure you want me to, Qin Mu closed her eyes slightly. Her long eyelashes were trembling. She tried her best to hold back her laughter. I want to kiss and hug you. I'm still massaging your feet. She reached out and stretched out her feet to let him see her slightly swollen little feet. Her white and tender little feet were slightly swollen because of her pregnancy. They were like a little pig's hoof as they stretched out in front of him. All of a sudden, the little bit of charm in his heart vanished into thin air. He held her little feet and gently massaged them. Is this okay? Qin Mu closed her eyes comfortably and let him massage them. After one foot, he moved on to the other. Zhou Chongguang finished massaging both feet and gently put them down. Qin Mu seemed to have fallen asleep. He leaned over and said in a low voice, Qin Mu. She opened her eyes in a daze and hugged his neck with her little hands. Zhou Chongguang. Are you done massaging? She wanted to sleep because it was too comfortable. Zhou Chongguang bit her little ear fiercely. You're done teasing me. Now let me go, Then what do you want? Qin Mu still had her eyes closed, but her little hands were busy unbuttoning his shirt. One button, two buttons, and then her little hands fell down. In an instant, she fell asleep. Mr. Zhou was originally full of passion. He hadn't been like this for a long time. Because she was pregnant, he didn't dare to mess around. She also didn't allow him to say that his body wasn't well. Tonight, he finally loosened up, but she fell asleep halfway. That hour of massaging her feet was for nothing. He stroked his forehead and smiled softly. In fact, it wasn't for nothing. Being with her, no matter what they did, they were always happy. Faintly, he felt very happy. The wine, women, and wealth that he once pursued seemed so pale in front of such a life. Zhou Chongguang smiled slightly and kissed the corner of her mouth. Good night, Mumu. He covered her with the quilt and stroked their child through the quilt. The little guy was almost 5 months old and would be born in less than 4 months. Their lives would be more complete. Zhou Chongguang's heart was full. He felt that his heart was filled with happiness. He couldn't resist kissing Qin Mu again before quietly leaving the master bedroom and going to the children's room next door. Little Shui Mu had already been coaxed to sleep by the servants. His little face was clean and white, and he was quiet. Shui Mu had grown up a little and his eyes had become more mature. He no longer looked like Qin Mu when he was young, but he could still see the shadow of Gu Mei. He used to be a little worried that Qin Mu would be unhappy. But sometimes, when he wasn't there, he would see Qin Mu smiling at Shui Mu, hugging him, kissing him. Qin Mu didn't seem to mind. She didn't mind, and neither did Zhou Chongguang. Gu Mei was their past, Shui Mu's mother. The past was the past, and Shui Mu was real. Zhou Chongguang sat on the edge of the small bed, quietly watching Shui Mu, occasionally thinking of Gu Mei. Chapter 2796. Zhou Chongguang watched until it was late at night. He kissed little Shui Mu's little face and walked out slowly to return to the room. Qin Mu slept soundly. She slept well, probably because she had missed a lot of sleep while taking care of him in the early stages of her pregnancy. He pursed his lips and reached out to touch her little face. Then, he went to take a shower and hugged her when his body was warm. Qin Mu woke up slightly and rubbed her little face against his shoulder. She said in a low voice, "You're back." She knew that he had to visit little Shui Mu every night. He was a very good husband and father now. She wasn't angry because Shui Mu was their son now. In the future, she might never mention Gu Mei to Shui Mu. It wasn't because she was cruel, but because she wanted to protect him. Shui Mu should have a complete life, and Gu Mei probably wanted that too. Qin Mu rubbed her little face and said in a daze, "Chongguang, are you going to sleep?" He nodded and rubbed her little head. "Go to sleep." Qin Mu chuckled. "We haven't made love yet." Chongguang, are you feeling bad? Her little hand moved down naughtily. Finally, she gasped. I've caught you. He had no choice but to kiss her little mouth. I'm fine. Moo, go to sleep. Be good. However, her little hand kept messing around. How could he fall asleep? His voice became slightly serious. Qin Moo, stop playing. If you continue playing, you'll probably be broken. He looked at her sleepy and really didn't dare to touch her. He was afraid that he would wake up their child. Sometimes, Zhou Chongguang still had some obstacles. Because she was a girl, he seemed to feel guilty when he did that to Qin Moo. However, he had never said such things. Qin Moo didn't know that he would have such a perverted thought. As he said that, Qin Moo pursed her lips, turned over and kissed his lips. She said mischievously, I don't believe that you don't want to. He clearly wanted to, yet he was still pretending to be serious. She kissed him and placed her finger on his lips. Zhou Chongguang, you weren't like this in the past. You were always direct. Although he hadn't used it much in the past, if he wanted it, why would he have so many misgivings? Qin Moo bit her lip and coughed softly. Don't tell me you can't do it anymore. These words were the biggest challenge to a man. Zhou Chongguang bit her lips. Is that what you think? Before Qin Moo could answer, she suddenly cried out and bit his shoulder, Zhou Chongguang. You're so bad. He laughed lowly and began to bully her. She was pregnant, so he didn't dare to use force. He only dared to do it gently. She was like a little kitten. After a long time, she grabbed his shoulder and cried softly, Zhou Chongguang. Of course, he knew what was wrong with her. He coaxed her, okay, be good. You have to take it slow when you're pregnant. It won't be good if you hurt the child. In fact, it was harder for him to hold it in than her. He had been holding it in for a long time, and now that he had let it go, how could he be satisfied just like that? But for the sake of the child, he still gave it to her gently once. After that, she closed her eyes slightly to calm down, and he kept kissing her little face to appease her. She was longer than before, and it took a long time for her to calm down. His heart was full of love. After a long time, he said in a low voice, Moo Moo, I'm going to the bathroom. Qin Moo was a little surprised. She looked at him and said, Zhou Chongguang. He smiled bitterly and kissed her. I'm fine. I'll be back to accompany you in a while. Chapter 2797. Qin Moo bit her lip and reached out to pull him, but he had already walked toward the bathroom. He was walking in a hurry, as if he was in a hurry. Qin Moo leaned against the head of the bed and suddenly bit the quilt with a faint smile. She suddenly felt that he was very cute. Then she held her stomach and walked toward the bathroom under the warm yellow light. She gently opened the bathroom door and saw Zhou Chongguang standing under the shower, doing what all men would do. Qin Moo's face was a little hot. Although they were husband and wife, she was sure that no man would like his wife to see such a scene. Biting her lip, she walked over, hugged him from behind, and kissed his back. Let me do it. Zhou Chongguang's body froze and he asked uncertainly, Moo Moo? Her little face was pressed against his back, and there was only a round belly between them. Her little hand moved down, intending to please him. But after all, she didn't do such a thing. Not only did Zhou Chongguang not feel happy, but he also felt a little pain. His voice became hoarser as he called her name, Moo Moo. Although it was painful, his heart was filled with joy. Qin Moo's face was extremely hot. She had been buried behind his back, and under his lead, her little hand slowly began to feel something. Zhou Chongguang panted lightly, raised his head slightly, and took a deep breath. Moo Moo, you make me feel that this kind of pleasure is a little sinful. With that, he pulled her in front of him, looked at her gently, and kissed the corner of her mouth. You're my wife. I should cherish you. Qin Mu clung to his body and rested her face on his shoulder. Her body was drenched in the warm water with him. As she kissed him, she murmured, "You're my husband. Isn't it normal, to please you?" With that, she looked up at him. Zhou Chongguang did the same. Their eyes met, and there was an indescribable feeling in them. Under his gaze, Qin Mu slowly squatted down. In the next second, Zhou Chongguang snorted in embarrassment. He gently stroked his wife's little face and snorted happily, "Moo moo." She ignored him and focused on pleasing him. Zhou Chongguang groaned in embarrassment. In the end, he pulled her up and held her in his arms. She could feel his racing heartbeat. She chuckled mischievously and poked his shoulder. "Do you like it, Mr. Zhou?" Zhou Chongguang calmed down for a while before saying in a low, hoarse voice, "I like it. I like it very much. Any man would like his wife to do this. This would definitely satisfy all the wild imaginations of men." Zhou Chongguang did not expect that Qin Mu would be willing to do this for him. In the past, they were at their best, but after he disappointed her, she was still willing. He hugged her. His heart was beating fast, but he was also moved. Qin Mu let go of everything. She had let go of everything. What else could he not let go of? He gently hugged his little wife and looked up. His eyes seemed to contain billions of stars, but also seemed to contain only Qin Mu. They hugged each other quietly. It was such an intense love affair, but in the end, they calmed down and their hearts were even more satisfied. Perhaps, this was what happiness was like. Zhou Chongguang lowered his head and kissed Qin Mu's belly. He smiled and said, "Little one, it's time to sleep." In the dark night. Chapter 2798. Dark Night. Qin Chen sat in the back seat of the limousine and looked at the dark night outside quietly. The streets of B City were bustling with lights like a long dragon. But in her eyes, it was lonely. Her heart was empty. After a long time, she felt that the emptiness was loneliness. Because she had become a person again, and there was no one to accompany her. She pursed her beautiful thin lips and turned to look at the driver in the front. "Uncle Zhao, drive faster." Old Zhao smiled. "Second miss, this car is already very fast. If it goes faster, Uncle Zhao will have to give you a ticket." Qin Chen didn't speak anymore. But Uncle Zhao's chatterbox seemed to be opened. He didn't want to give up this opportunity to chat. "Second miss, are you going to find a boyfriend?" Qin Chen looked at him indifferently and didn't say anything for a long time. Old Zhao thought that she wouldn't answer. This second miss was too cold. She usually made herself like a man. The most important thing was that she didn't talk much. When she had something to say, it wasn't a good thing. But after a while, Qin Chen said with a faint tone, "Yes." Old Zhao was shocked. The well-equipped limousine floated for a moment. But he quickly returned to the right track and smiled. No wonder second miss is so anxious. Anxious? Qin Chen couldn't help but refute, "Uncle Zhao, isn't this word used to describe men?" Old Zhao smiled again. "Second miss, look at you from head to toe. If you don't look like a man, are you a woman?" In the whole Qin family, only old Zhao dared to say such words. Qin Chen glared at him for a long time, but it was useless. Old Zhao's trick succeeded. He smiled with satisfaction and brainwashed her. "Second miss, men like girls with long hair and wearing skirts. It's okay for the time being, but it won't last long." Old Zhao smiled mysteriously. "I think Mr. Lan and second miss are already prepared to be a prostitute, but the result may be an unexpected surprise." The more old Zhao talked, the more excited he became. The most important thing between a husband and wife is trust and honesty. Trust is a matter of the spiritual level, but honesty is different. It's a matter of flesh and blood. Say, when people are together, they can't hide it, right? Otherwise, if we do that, we'll have to, what's that? Old Zhao picked up a glass of water and took a sip. Sometimes, there's an extra layer of gauze, which adds a layer of beauty to it. That's what's popular now. This year's Victoria's Secret fashion show is being held in H City. Look at those fat and skinny women. When they put on those clothes, all of them look different. Look at those big, long legs, that chest, that waist. Even men who have lost their virginity can be revived. It's like an aphrodisiac. Qin Chen couldn't help but ask, Uncle Zhao, does Auntie Zhao know that you're obsessed with these fairies? Ha, looking is just looking, how can I be infatuated with it? In my heart, Auntie Zhao is still the most beautiful. She's just wearing a sweatshirt and pants, and I feel that she's mighty and domineering. Then, Old Zhao said with some embarrassment, then I automatically lay flat on the ground. Qin Chen was stunned. He didn't know what to say. It turned out that Uncle Zhao was still a little submissive, however, with Old Zhao's nonsense, he was not as anxious as before. Half an hour later, the car stopped in front of Lan Yu's villa. Qin Chen got out of the car and walked a few steps before coming back. He told Old Zhao, drive back. I won't be coming back tonight. Old Zhao gave a thumbs up. Second miss is mighty. Chapter 2799. Qin Chen couldn't help but roll her eyes. She waved at Lao Zhao and walked in quickly. After entering, she wondered why the door was open. But soon, she found a red Ferrari sports car in the parking lot in front of her. Qin Chen recognized that model. It was a global limited edition car that the rich second generation and the G second generation loved. And most of the red ones were women. Someone who had a relationship with Lan Yu, who could drive a limited edition car that cost tens of millions, and who had a flamboyant personality, Qin Chen felt that the range could be narrowed down to one person. She pursed her lips tightly. Originally, she could pretend that nothing had happened and leave this place. Then, she would completely separate from Lan Yu. But at this moment, there was a hint of unwillingness in her heart. She walked slowly into the foyer. The lights were on everywhere, but the first floor was empty. And upstairs, there was an undeniable moaning sound of a man and a woman screaming and panting. Qin Chen lifted her feet and shrank back. At this moment, she thought of Lao Zhao's words, men all like little vixens who wore thin clothes. Lan Yu was no exception. Qin Chen stood downstairs quietly for about a minute. She still went upstairs. She walked through the corridor. The light shone on her face, bright and dark. She walked to the door of the master bedroom on the second floor and saw a mess on the floor. Lan Yu's trousers, Lan Yu's shirt, Lan Yu's belt, and the women's dresses were stacked together warmly. And on the luxurious bed, the big bed that she and Lan Yu had spent the whole night together, there was someone else. Lan Yu leaned against the headboard. Qin Chen thought that she should be glad that he still had an extra pair of underwear on him. They didn't have time to have sex. It was her who came at the wrong time. And in his arms, from the back, was really a little stunner who could spit fire. She was wearing a fiery red chiffon that reflected the white snow. She was small and delicate, but there were places where she should be. Her body was faintly discernible. This was the kind of extreme seduction that Uncle Zhao had mentioned. Qin Chen didn't need to look at her face to know that it was Lin Sisi. There was no expression on Qin Chen's face. She just quietly watched them kiss and entangle with each other. About a minute later, Lan Yu suddenly raised his eyes and looked at Qin Chen in shock. His face turned deathly pale in that instant, and he stared at her with a death stare. His body stiffened, and he forgot to push Lin Sisi away, allowing her to kiss him. Qin Chen chuckled. Sorry to bother you. At this moment, Lin Sisi turned her head. That smile was very charming. She touched Lan Yu's body with her fingers and said sweetly, Dr. Qin, it was you who didn't want Lan Yu. I'm just here to have a drink with him, so, they rolled onto the bed, right? Qin Chen didn't pay attention to Lin Cece. He just looked at Lan Yu and said calmly, "Are you drunk?" Lan Yu slightly closed his eyes. "No." "Then, did she drug you?" Qin Chen's expression became extremely cold and calmer. But this calmness was a little suffocating. It was as if she had made a big decision. Lan Yu didn't speak for a long time. Qin Chen smiled faintly and sadly. "Did she?" Lan Yu smiled bitterly and pushed Lin Cece away. He got off the bed and walked to Qin Chen. Chapter 2800. And he did drink a little and was slightly drunk, but not so drunk that he didn't know who the woman on the bed was. He was with Lin Cece because he wanted to give up on Qin Chen. Because he was a little tired. So, he tried it with the woman who came to him. He wanted to see if he was interested in other women. But after lying in bed for half an hour, he wasn't excited. But he couldn't tell Qin Chen about this. He couldn't tell her, "Qin Chen, I found someone else because I wanted to give up on you." He would rather let her believe that it was because of loneliness. Lan Yu let out a long sigh and looked into her eyes. "No." Qin Chen's eyes were locked on him. After about 5 seconds, she smiled and said, "You guys can continue." With that, she walked quickly to the stairs. She couldn't stay here for a moment longer. Lan Yu grabbed her arm. "Qin Chen." She struggled to free herself from his grip, but was unable to do so. She slowly turned around and looked at him. "Lan Yu, let's part on good terms. You have things you can't accept, and similarly, I have things I can't accept." He was still holding her, unwilling to let go. He just said in a low voice, "I'm sorry, Qin Chen. I promise I won't do it again." He didn't like Lin Cece, but he wanted to give up on Qin Chen. This was an indisputable fact. He was sorry to him for wanting to give up on him, not Lin Cece. He had no interest in Lin Cece at all. His refusal to let go finally made Qin Chen angry. She raised her hand and slapped him. A 5-fingered handprint immediately appeared on Lan Yu's face. He turned his face away. He looked a little embarrassed, but more than that, he was embarrassed. Qin Chen's face was very cold. "Don't think that I can forgive you for cheating on me like Zhou Chongguang. Lan Yu, I'm not such a magnanimous person." With that, she went straight downstairs. This time, Lan Yu didn't catch her. He just watched her leave and felt that all the strength in his body was drained. This time, he seemed to have really lost her. At this time, Lin Cece came over. She had already put on her clothes and was holding a small bag. She walked over and chuckled. As expected, men can't stand loneliness. In fact, she clearly knew that this man did not have any feelings for her. He was just confused. He only wanted to give up because he was in pain. He succeeded, and she, of course, succeeded as well. Lan Yu narrowed his eyes. "Did you call her to come?" Lin Cece smiled sweetly and then bit her delicate nails. "I didn't. She came so late, probably because she wanted to make up with you. Maybe she would agree if you proposed to get engaged, but unfortunately." Lin Cece's slender fingers slid on his shoulder. "You messed it all up. Dr. Qin is a clean freak and a proud person. You should know it best. It was not easy for her to accept you, a second-hand good." Now, Lin Cece's face was right in front of his. "Lan Yu, you've been struck out. It was just a small trick, and it had killed him. How useless." Next, she had to focus on dealing with Rong Lei. Unlike Lan Yu, that man's personality was the same as Qin Chen's. She thought that it would be easier to deal with such a man than Lan Yu. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.